Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Miggy Writes Metal. Today I got a little bit of a special video for you. I'm going to go through a compressor with you guys, so we're going to understand what the knobs do, how compression works. Now this video isn't necessarily about how to compress an instrument, it's just about learning the compressor itself, so when you open one up, you don't get intimidated by all these weird knobs and all these little numbers that are on it. So with that said, let's dive into Logic and I'll show you how a compressor works. Okay, so here we're in Logic now, and as you can see, I have a stock compressor that comes in Logic. This is kind of styled after an 1176 compressor with a little bit of extra things. We're not going to worry about anything on this side, so we're not going to worry about the limiter, threshold, distortion, mix, output, none of that stuff. We're just going to worry about these 5 knobs that are right here, and we're not even going to worry about these auto gain features, none of that stuff. So pretty basic. So up on top, you can see, this is normally how it comes original with these VU meters. If you see like an analog compressor, this is normally what you see on them. It just tells you the gain reduction. Gain reduction being how much of the dynamic range you're going to be bringing down. So dynamic range pretty much means that from the highest peak to the lowest peak, that's the dynamic range. So this gauge kind of tells you, okay, how much of that peak you're bringing back down to level. Compression is one of those things that's kind of tricky. It took me a long time to understand. And yeah, it's something that takes time for your ear to develop to listen to. But after you kind of understand it, then you realize that all compressors are the same. They all work the same way. There's little nuances, but we'll get to that. I don't want to get too complicated because then I overload you guys with information. So right now I have it on the graph side, so it's a little bit easier to see what's going through it. I just got a basic snare going through it. Let's play it. The most run-of-the-mill basic metal snare you ever heard in your life. And look, this is what's going to happen. So I'm going to bring up the threshold, and you guys let me know if you guys hear a difference. Did you hear that? I hope you didn't hear anything because there was nothing going on. Right now, our ratio is 1:1 pretty much. There's nothing going through. We're not getting any kind of peaks. Now, on some compressors, you could use this as an effect for saturation. Distressors have that where if you like leave it at a 1:1 and you bring up the threshold, you can actually get like a saturation effect out of it. We're not talking about that stuff today, but for the sake of this compressor, for the sake of learning today, we're not doing any kind of compression. But even at a 1:1 setting, you're not doing anything on a compressor. So let's see what happens as I bring up the ratio. I'm going to keep it at minus 50 dB. Just so we could really hear what's going on. I'm going to bring it to about 2 to 1. That's a massive difference. And you can see right now we're compressing down like 20. We're like at 20 dB, just destroying that snare. Now, this kind of leads me to the other button on here, which is the makeup gain. So a lot of compressors will have something like this. It's called the makeup, or in the bottom you'll see it's output gain. It just pretty much tells you to bring up the volume. So you can like match it. So let's say, for example, if I turn the compressor off, just to match the volume. So, but we're not going to be messing around with that stuff today. I'm just kind of giving you guys the basics. So all ratio is how much of that dynamic range you want it to bring down as it passes through the threshold. Now in rock and metal, we typically use more aggressive settings than 2 to 1. We're normally like 4 to 1, 6 to 1. Sometimes you could use a 3 to 1 and 2 to 1 if you want to like stack compression. That's a very common thing, especially like on vocals and transient things like drums or snares. But that's what threshold does pretty much. It just tells you how much of the signal you want to bring through. So for every 5 dB that are going over that threshold, you're bringing it down 1 dB. So now that we understand that, I'm gonna leave this at a 4 to 1 so you guys can see what's going on. Now these are really the knobs that you want to kind of pay attention to. I mean, compression is very important. You want to control the dynamic range on all your tracks. But this is kind of what people get confused with sometimes with the attack and the release. It's a very simple thing to understand. Let me get a snare here going. So let's make it obvious. Attack tells you how much of that transient you want to let through. The reason why we're doing it with a snare drum is because it's a very transient drum, and you can hear when the stick hits the top of the snare. Look what happens as I start moving that needle back. Now, do you see what's happening with the graph up here as I move it back? You can see that it's doing less gain reduction. Well, the reason why is because we're actually compressing after the transient. So when you hit the snare, the initial peak that drumstick does against the snare head, that's the transient. So essentially what we're doing is that because we're such at a higher attack now, we've brought back the attack time from that transient to the body of the snare. Now, what does release do? Well, release is going to tell you how quick you want the gain reduction meter to go back to zero. Not necessarily you have to go back to zero all the time, but it's just kind of, that's the way that I measure, especially on drums, for fast-paced metal tracks, rock stuff. You kind of always want the needle to go back to zero, especially on drums. But this is what the release does. We're gonna see it on the graph. It's gonna be very obvious. So I'm gonna bring the reduction. I'm gonna bring the snare back to zero attack over here, and I'm gonna gain match it so you guys can hear it a little bit better. A little bit better. So now look what happens as I bring up the release. Look at the lines on the graph. Look over here. Look what happens to them. You see how much slower that gain reduction meter is moving back to zero? That's all that does. Attack is how quick you want the compressor to react to a signal, and the release is how quick do you want the gain reduction meter to go back to zero. That's pretty much all it is. Makeup gain, kind of touched on it a little bit. It's just bringing up the level to where it was before you compress the signal, so you kind of gain match it. Because normally when you start doing a mix, you kind of want to have everything balanced first and then jump into mixing. When you add compression to a signal, depending on how you add compression, it could either make it really loud or it can make it really quiet. I'll give you guys an example here with a different compressor so you guys can see what I mean. So I'm just going to use the virtual compressor here. I'm going to use the distressor because it's a little bit different. I'm going to turn these off, so don't worry about these. These are off right now. We're just worrying about this compressor here. So the way that these compressors work is that you see there's no like threshold. There's no threshold on this. It doesn't tell you threshold anywhere. Well, some compressors work in a way where the input is the threshold. So pretty much the more signal you send into the compressor, it's a set threshold, and then that's not going to go up anymore from that. It's set there, and as you bring the volume up, then it starts compressing the signal down. So as I turn this input up, you're going to hear it get loud. Yeah. If I bring it down, it's non-existent. It's quiet. It's pretty much on mute. So yeah, that's how those compressors work. This is typical distressors. I believe some 1176s are the same, which actually there's one right here. The same way, it's an input volume. There's no like really set threshold. I hope you guys understood how a compressor works. If you guys want to see more videos like this, where I teach you guys how to use mixing tools, let me know. I love to make these videos. I love helping you guys out. And with that said, Miggy out.